Sounds good. Check. No echo now.
Okay, perfect.
Echo is gone. Goodbye, echo.
Skype's amazing. All right. Well, let me check out our stream, make sure we're live, and then we'll go with this conversation. Yeah, the reason I said, can we wait 8 minutes? I've got 8 minutes left in the most recent season of Ozark.
Oh, God.
So,
I think actually I'm going to get Ashley Coffin on to talk about Ozark on superhero ethics.
Oh, yeah.
I know we're pretty far away from superhero shows, but damn it, it's a quarantine. We can do anything we want.
Yeah, right. There are ethics in Ozark?
There are ethical questions in Ozark. The fact that most people don't have the best answers to those questions.
Yeah, there's very, very few ethical actors in Ozark.
Yeah, I actually think it makes for some of the best ethical questions, to be honest, because it's how do you find the most ethical when almost all the options are bad?
Yeah, it's tough. People often ask, like, I guess if people listen on the live stream, spoiler alert for Breaking Bad, I guess.
Or for Ozark. Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, people often ask, like, when did you fall off of, you've seen all of Breaking Bad, I assume, right?
Yeah.
People often ask, like, when did you fall off of Walt's story? When did you stop believing in Walt? And I always say, like, the first episode when he refused help, like, his pride is like the first thing that kicks that whole thing off. And it's often these shows, they get in these ethical, horrible dilemmas where they have to they keep making horrible decisions because they're just like in these sunk cost, like, situations where if they just stop, they'd be better off.
I have often talked about how I feel like Frank Castle on the Netflix Punisher show is an anti-hero. He's not a hero. He's a protagonist, but he's not a hero by any means. And my only frustration with the show is I feel like the writers don't know that. To me, he is very much in the same category as Breaking Bad. Like, I see it as that same, like, you can be an incredibly interesting, fascinating character to watch. Don Draper is not a moral person by any means.
Right.
But he carries Mad Men. So yeah, I think it's definitely true in Breaking Bad and to some extent in Ozark.
I think there's, we should get on. We should get on.
Hard 2:30 cutoff.
All right, let's get started. Hit and go live. Oh, right, already did that. Hitting record on my end, and go for the intro when you're ready.
Yep, of course I said that. I don't have the episode list up and going. Hello and welcome to Bingers Assemble. Let me try that one again. Today on Bingers Assemble, we're talking about Altered Carbon, Season 2, Episode 7, Experiment Perilous. We're talking about Kovac talking to Kovac. We're talking about who is the real Quinn and who's leading the revolution and what the hell is going on. We don't think we know, but hopefully you'll join us in our confusion. All this right after a commercial break we have no control over.
Oh, wait. Oh, there you go.
What?
Just for the live stream, little music. Welcome to Bingers Assemble. My name's Matthew Carroll.
I'm Matthew S. Fox.
How you doing, buddy?
I'm good. I thank those of us who follow us live for their patience. This took a while because I've been having massive internet problems all day. And I was also trying to bake some bread today and balancing. I had a very well planned out schedule of how to watch and record during Rises. As it stands, we have a hard cutoff at 2:30 because yeast waits for no man. So let's dive right into this.
Let's do it. This is maybe my favorite episode of the season, at least for Kovac.
Yeah.
My favorite Kovac episode of the season. For those of you watching this in the distant future or only distant future, I guess, or watched in the distant past, this is the episode where you finally get Kovac Prime talking to Kel and trying to convince her that he is her Kovac, and her subtly leading him on a tour of the past, and we finally get a little bit of history of Raylin, a little more depth to her character, a little more depth to Kel's character, and we really get a sense of where they all come down, and we get interaction between Kovac and Kovac, which, as we mentioned last cast, is one of my favorite things, when Kovac has someone to talk to, and he finally had someone to talk to this episode, and it made so much of a difference just having that. It was only like 6 lines, but man, it made a difference to like fleshing out what is going on with Kovac And man, the line, I'm just going to jump right in. My favorite line in the whole episode is when he says, he's talking about the death of Raylan, and he says, she said she's never going to stop, and that's when I knew. And then the other Kovac says, she wanted you to do it. And he says, I believe so. Because that was his question last season, is he didn't know. And over this 30 years, I love the characterization here because he has convinced himself. Like, he was not sure. When he had the most fresh information, when he had most recently seen this happen, he has been turning that moment over in his head for 30 years. And he has said, no, I have to believe that Raylan wanted me to kill her, because it means so much to his character for Raylan to have some nugget of goodness, because she is in many ways the origin of his entire story. She's the reason he did everything he did, and he has to believe there was some shred of a soul left.
Oh, see, that's interesting, because I definitely had the exact same feeling you did. I love that moment, and you're right, we haven't gotten his inner life much, and this is the first time, because I don't think he's ever really articulated that directly. Like, we've known it just by watching him and watching his flashbacks, but hearing him actually say it was so powerful. And having the other Kovac name that as well, it's that idea of their thought process both work the same way. They both come to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
But I have a somewhat different take. For me, it's not that she has a soul at all. I don't think that's a part of it. And I don't think that what did showed that. I think it's that he is still doing an act of mercy towards her. That, on some extent, he may have still thought he could save her, that he could stop her plans and bring her back from the brink and convince her to be a good person again, or at least some version of that. And this is his recognition of this is what she wanted. This is the loving act I could do for my sister, even given how nuts she was.
I completely am on board with that take. I think that's another side of this. But yeah, I think that he wanted to know that he had her permission, that it was her consent to do this thing of killing his own sister. Man, yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think that is also borne out in the episode. What's that noise?
Sorry, a desk drawer is falling open. I'm gonna go back and edit that out.
I got it. Or I think I've got markers down.
Okay.
It's borne out by that conversation last season as well. It's the same thing. It fits both of those sort of explanations, and I do think there's something in him that wants to believe there was some goodness left in her. But I totally agree. That's also that he wants permission. He wants to believe he had her permission, and I think he did. And I think he's right. But either way, I just love the idea of for 30 years he's turned it over in his head. And we know that where he left off last season, he did not know. He tells himself, I don't know. And now 30 years later, he's convinced himself. Because it goes to the narratives we tell ourselves to get by. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's fascinating and wonderful storytelling.
No,
love it.
And that's what so much of this show is about. I love that phrase you used, the stories we tell ourselves to get by, because it's funny. I was just discussing with a friend of mine, Shiva, which is the Jewish ritual of sort of remembering someone when they've passed away. And so it got us into a conversation about how do we remember the dead? And how over time, our memories of a person can become either more romanticized or more critical, but they get shaped. And there's a fascinating thing that happens here where a person dies and now all you have is their memories. And so your remembrance of them shifts and changes, and then the real them comes back, and you've got this crisis of between how I remember them and who they actually are. And this episode I feel really dived into exploring that for a couple of different characters that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, same here. And man, particularly his own memory of himself and who he was, and he is telling himself in this moment sort of the story of how it's kind of this story of how could he have ever done the things he did, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And he has told himself it's all because of the way Jaeger raised him, which I think is true to a point, but it also, there's also a moment where he says, I was, he said, what does he say? I was never afraid of the truth. He says, maybe we are different. I was never afraid of the truth, which is not true. Like that this is Kovac, and this is him, and he was afraid of the truth. So even though, and he even like a second later tells Kovac, Prime, Prime, whatever, whichever Kovac is the older Kovac or the Kovac Prime.
Yeah.
he tells Kovac Prime, he's like, I knew deep down that Raylan wasn't safe, and you know it too. And so that's him admitting the thing he just said about I was never afraid to know the truth. That's not true. But he has to convince himself that like he has this narrative arc of himself that he was always trying to do the right thing. And he wasn't making decisions. The brutal version of himself was making those decisions because he had been deceived. But he knows somewhere even deeper down that that's not even true. Like he made these decisions too, and he is somewhat culpable for the actions that he took as Kovac Prime.
And that's 100% relatable, because I know, one of the things that happens with gaslighting or other situations where someone is really kind of like pushing you to accept a particular narrative, which absolutely happened to Kovac, working with Carrera, at the very beginning, is that it really shifts and changes the way you view the past. And that once you break free of that, the way you view the past can really change pretty dramatically. I've gone through this, and I know lots of others who have. And so the idea that the two different Kovacs have very different understandings of the past makes total sense to me.
It's also, there's this view where even though we all grow and change, and we change the way we think about things, and we change our beliefs change, our decision-making processes change, what we know changes, there's still this nagging bit of ourselves that wants to have always been right. And I think that is one of the most toxic things I don't know if it's built in our DNA or if it's in our culture, but we have this idea that we want to have always been right. We're not worried about being right now, which makes us hold on to things that we know are wrong, which I think is exactly what's going on with Kovac Prime here.
Oh yeah.
And I have experienced this in my own life, and being able to just like look back and being like, no, that guy that I was wrong. Like, and it's okay to be like, that guy was wrong, because that's how you evolve. And it's even okay to go, I'm wrong right now, and I need to learn. And that's finding that place is so important. And I don't think either Kovac here has found that place. I know I haven't found that place fully. Like it's something that I really want to foster in myself. And I just love the exploration of that with this conversation. And in many ways, Kovac is whatever the male version of Mary Sue is. In some cases, like he's kind of, especially this season, he hasn't had really flaws. He's just kind of been the good guy, doing the good thing after Kel, with the exception of maybe his treatment of Poe. Yeah. But like there's a flaw here. There's a flaw in his logic, and I like that they're exploring that.
Yeah, I think Gary Stu is the equivalent of Mary Sue.
Gary Stu. Yeah,
I remember.
We've talked about it on another episode, I think, even.
I will. For me, also, there's one other thing about this episode that I loved, especially because at first I thought they were going in a different direction. And yes, I'm going to talk about cliches because, one of the classic cliches out there, like, to think how I would describe it, I'll just say, like, when Kovac Prime was talking to Falconer, and it looked like he had her convinced, and so we were going to have to watch our hero like fight against the person who we thought he loved, like, go through this whole thing. I was kind of rolling my eyes a bit because I've seen that story so many times. And as it went on, I started to think maybe she doesn't believe him. I hope she doesn't believe him. And so when we realized she doesn't, especially that moment where, like, he gets an order from Carrera, she hears it, and she's clearly finger on the trigger, already ready to jump him the moment she has to by pulling the knife out. I just loved that. I was like, okay, good. This is such a more interesting story, and it made that whole dynamic between her and him and the new Kovac just so fascinating to watch.
Mm-hmm. And I love that she tells him about the weapon. Like, as soon as she realizes what's going on, she tells him about the weapon, so that makes all the people back off. She knew exactly what she was doing. But what she really wanted to show him, there was a weapon. There wasn't a weapon they wanted, but the weapon that she had in that cavern was the truth. and she was going to give that truth to Kovac, the truth of Raylan's backstory, the truth of her, and sort of providing a sort of forgiveness to Kovac, because this Kovac Prime is looking at the sins of his future. The sins of his future version and being like, I could never be this person. And then she has to guide him down the path to realize that, no, yes, you make that decision, but it was actually that's not the bad decision you've made. You're making the bad decision now by listening to Yeager. It was just beautifully done. And the way that it's very small. It's a very small thing. But Raylan tells her as she's trapped in that cryo chamber, she tells her, you weren't supposed to be on that shuttle. Talk was. He was the one that was supposed to be downloaded into the stack, which is a huge part of her backstory that we've never known.
Yeah.
And that is the tragedy that she's dealing with. She thought she was gonna get away with Talk, but instead, Talk got separated from her, and then she never got to be with him. And so when she made all those decisions to betray them, part of her plan was to be copied and get away with her brother, and that didn't happen. And then she waits 300 years. And so that explains a lot about her desire to be with him, and it also explains a lot about kind of the dark turn she takes, because she is kind of wanting to torture Kel by continuing these visits and explaining what's going on in the surface world. It just it really like fleshed out her character in a way that we've both talked about wanting Kel's and Raylan's stories fleshed out, and this gave us that in one episode.
I thought the idea of having because I've talked about wanting a flashback episode for both of them, and having it be basically a flashback, but instead of it being the TV show being a flashback, have there be a way in the show, in the world, for characters today to watch basically literally a flashback. I just thought that was such a good use of using the technology that they've created for storytelling. It was so good. I will say I have two minor quibbles about those couple of scenes.
Sure.
The first is, and this is generally just a quibble about all shows, but this was just kind of my breaking point. Do you remember a time in any science fiction or superhero type show where one character is pointing a gun at the other one with a clear, if you move, I will shoot you. And then the other one makes a sudden movement to knock the gun out of their hands. And the first person, who is, highly combat trained and has combat reflexes, gets the shot off before the person knocks the gun out of their hands. Because I can't think of a time it happened.
No, it's a trope.
Pointing a gun at someone and saying, don't move, is a completely useless endeavor in all of these worlds, because it never, ever works. Right.
It's a trope, but it's a trope for a reason. It's a storytelling element, and I don't know of a way to do it. I mean, I guess in a way Star Wars solved this problem by making them have that Skype connection.
That's true.
This is a chance for the villain and the hero to have a conversation, which are often incredibly interesting, but the only way to do that is to provide a reason for them to or provide the situation for them to get them at gunpoint and provide them a reason not to pull the trigger, and then you get a chance for a hero and a villain, or two people on opposed sides of an issue, they don't have to be heroes and villains, to have a conversation. So it's a trope, totally point taken, but I think it's a trope for a reason.
I just would like to see them do at least a little more to justify why the person knocks the thing out of their hands before they get a shot off. But anyway, small thing aside, the other thing that bothered me a little bit is I agree that we got a lot of backstory for Raylan's character, but this is not the character I thought she was, because the way they set this up, it looks like that first moment where she's with Calcrest and spinning her down into that, the frozen ice chamber thing. That happens very soon after, the Battle of Stronghold and all that. And I wasn't ready to see her be that dark already. I really liked the idea that it was, that when that first happened, she was making a desperation move and it was a really shitty thing she did. But it was still kind of she was still that person who desperately loves her brother and is just a little bit not looking at the consequences of things. And it kind of, the story that I was seeing of her was that then over these next 300 years, there's this slow moral breakdown, as happens with other meths, where she becomes more and more willing to do terrible things in order to help her brother. So seeing her being willing to like just flat out torture someone in this horrible way that quickly, it definitely threw me a bit. Again, not a huge deal, but it was like,
Right.
that's not the character I thought we established in season 1.
Well, we never got her backstory, and we never
Right.
knew what it was. So this isn't like you said, it's not a huge problem because it's not out of not necessarily out of continuity or anything, but it is so. And then they address it twice. There's that, but then also when Talk is talking to Talk, he says, you know that she was that way. Like she was that way as soon as we left, as soon as Jaeger convinced us to leave her. So like it was not necessarily her methdom that made her that way. She was that way on Harlan when she's working with the Yakuza, and that's something that she was pushed into. And it's interesting, and I don't know if I like or don't like what it says about trauma. And they both dealt with their abusive father and their abusive father killing their mother, it's one of them ended up as a child soldier being manipulated by Jaeger, I guess, but he found Kel in time. But somehow her experience with the Yakuza pushed her over the edge. Maybe it was how she continued to be mistreated, and he had some positive experience even if they were deceptive. I don't know. It's interesting what it's saying about that the way they both ended up dealing with the trauma, I guess.
Yeah. I can see that, although then there raises questions about how no one saw that side of her while she was with them in Stronghold. But I definitely can see that. It was just, and again, it's a small thing, but it just threw me a bit.
Well, she does try to kill Kel when she's not looking. Like she's the one that Kel originally grabs the knife out of the air. And like that was it was with kind of Kel's consent of like attack me if you can, and then she says, right. "Oh, you surprised me. You better surprise me better next time." So like she was never on board with the Kellists. I think she was just there for her brother, and her brother slowly got deeper and deeper into the Kellist religion of sorts, and she pushes back against that.
I think it's definitely true. What did you think of the reveal about Kemp and the governor's plans all along? I
very much expected it. That was one of my theories in the very first episode when we first see her announce the treaty. I was like, something seems kind of like it's a play here. Like she's got this. It's like I don't know if Kemp's actually a good guy. Like when he shows up in that thing, I was like, this seems like it's not going to be like an actual war. But the thing that really was confusing to me is Kovacs jumps over that thing and kills a bunch of Kellists. Shoots like 5 Kellists. And then immediately they say, by the way, none of them know anything. Only Kemp does. Like none of the peons know. And so he just killed a bunch of people who were actually fighting the rebellion.
Yeah, I loved everything about that scene except for except for Kovacs shooting them, because it just seemed like it didn't make any sense. Because what I loved there was, I mean, again, let's talk about loyalties. Like, there's a joke going around a lot about how, if Jesus actually came back and was talking to, and you can say this from any direction. Like, there's a lot of people who think that other Christians aren't giving an actually good Jesus message. I have my own perspective on it, but everyone has their own. But like, it's a kind of a common joke that if Jesus came back and said to like one particular group, like, nah, your priest is totally wrong. Like, this is actually what I meant. Like, would they actually follow Jesus, or would they be like, nah, our priest said it, so you must be a fraud? And I loved seeing that play out among these followers who were having this moment of like, Kemp has been basically the high priest of our God, and our God is Falconer. And I thought they did such a good job of, while she was taking the test, we kept seeing these like moments on her on the faces of the different members of the revolution. And you could see the ones who were both wrestling with it, but also that a lot of them were coming around to really believing in her.
I kind of wish it had been a nice moment where she could have reprimanded Talk, and that would have made it better for me. Like, they were going to listen to me. Why did you do that? Because it was that moment. Those people were deciding whether to follow Kemp or follow Kel, and he was telling them they weren't real, and she was telling him that he wasn't real, and it was their decision. And Talk didn't give them that chance.
Like I said, I totally agree with you there. I'm kind of just ignoring that moment and focusing on the other good, how much the rest of that scene was good. But you're right.
Right.
That moment was just bad writing overall. They could have done that much better.
Yeah.
But my point was the moments when they're looking, and I also just feel like, you know, Kemp's face seemed so torn when he was realizing she really was Falconer. And I think now we realize a lot of that was because of fear, because he realized like, oh shit, I'm in real trouble now.
Mm-hmm.
But to me, the real important part was when he like Kemp gets accused and he starts to, say, no, she's not the real Falconer. And this is also part of why Talk shooting them seemed so dumb. From the looks on their faces and the way they were acting, I think most of them don't believe Kemp. They already believe Falconer.
I thought so too.
Which you think about is kind of amazing that like he's been their leader for 30 years and this woman shows up and they know him for 5 minutes and they're like, no, she's the real thing.
Well, yeah, I don't think he's been the leader for 30 years.
So well done.
I think he's been the leader probably around the same time that the governor took over, because he's part of the governor's plan, and so I think that he is. I think this whole Kellis rebellion is sort of part of the governor's plan, and she created a straw man so that she could hold on to power, and Kemp is in her pocket. So we don't know how long he's been out there, but he's not. He doesn't look that old, so I can't imagine it's more than 3 or 4 years out there.
It's certainly a while. I mean, he's built a real connection with these people.
Yeah, for sure, and that was so powerful to see her. That trial they give to envoys, to see her face that trial and do it so well, like the Kel herself who created those trials, taking those trials, and when she catches those, I loved this moment when they ask her a question and she says, what is your hypocrisy? Like why can you answer for your hypocrisy? And then they throw 2 knives at her and she grabs them out of the air and then says, hypocrisy implies choice. I had no choice. I was spun up against my will, but I'm an envoy and I take what's offered. And as she says, I take what's offered, she holds the knives because she didn't just dodge the knives, she caught the knives. And it's just like it's great physical representation of taking what's offered, as well as saying, I take what's offered. I was given my life back and I'm going to use it to do what envoys do. Man, I just freaking loved that moment.
Yeah. I feel like that moment alone, like it taught us so much, both about why Falconer led this rebellion and why people gave her this like near deity status. And just exactly like, I feel like I now know so much more about what it means to be an envoy in a way I loved. And I'll say one more thing on that. I think the person who I thought seemed that I most enjoyed watching them get convinced was Trek, Misty Knight.
Trek, yeah.
Because clearly she also knows that her life's in danger and she wants Kovacs to win, and she wants Quinn to pass the tests, and she gives this sigh of relief when she does. But they keep showing her face, and they keep showing her face like she believes. And she was probably the one who started all this, even more cynical than Kovacs. And so watching Falconer be able to convince her, I thought that was such a great moment and really paid off Trek's story from the beginning.
Yeah, it's Trep, by the way.
Trep, thank you, Trep.
Yeah. I agree, and that's really cool. And she found her brother, and I'm assuming he's still alive, at least in the form of a stack.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like.
So yes, it's the light's still blue. So loved that. I loved the moment she sees her family's crest. All of that was cool, and of course the moment we have failed to mention so far, and I can't believe we've gotten this far, all this character talk, but what about Kel calling down fire from heaven?
Oh God.
So good.
Well, and the whole thing of like, it's not like what she says is that I can't hold it in anymore.
Well, she's got whatever this beast is.
I think it really speaks to that theory you had that there's an elder inside of her.
Yeah,
or at least that she's part elder, and that's what she couldn't, because, it's the elder fire she's calling down from heaven.
That's right.
From their whole satellite system.
Yeah. So absolutely, I think it's we've kind of known that for a long time, but it seems that is very clearly what's happening here. Something breaks free within her, and she's got some sort of elder consciousness inside of her, and it calls down fire to destroy all of these protectorate soldiers. And man, it was a beautiful scene. Yeah. And it just completely awesome. We actually we again, that's something we called, I think, in the very first episode when they mentioned the satellites. We were like, yeah, that's definitely going to be a plot point near the end.
Oh yeah.
And surely, like, we were like, someone's going to learn to control those, and her being able to like control it with seemingly her mind, that was just powerful and fun, man. And
I thought it made a really nice contrast against, like, the governor used those for her own plots, with the fireworks thing. But it was a very much like, I know there's an if-then statement, and if I do this, they'll do that. So I'll take advantage of that, but I don't have any actual control of it. Whereas what Falconer does, or this version of Falconer, it's funny because she doesn't have control of herself, but whatever part of her is controlling it is 100% controlling the elder technology, not just like using it to do what it normally does.
Yeah.
I will also say I think one of my favorite plot lines so far is this kind of like chess match that's happening between the colonel and the governor. They're both very interesting characters because they're both clearly villains, but they each have their own motivations that seem believable. Like, they're not mustache twirlers. And they've had to kind of work together this whole time, but also with different agendas. And like, it seemed like every episode, one or the other of them is on top, is gaining power. And last time it seemed like the colonel had more control. And this time seeing the governor, like, put her card down on the table. I'm really enjoying that. And I'm sure that like both of them are going to wind up coming to a terrible end, terrible, much deserved end. But I'm really liking seeing that battle, especially because probably if they could put aside their agendas and their egos and actually work together, I think our heroes would be done for. But seeing that they can't do that, I'm loving it.
Possibly, I think we're getting a little something different with Jaeger, because when Prime turns off his little eye, whatever, his camera, there's a real devastation on Jaeger's face, and I think that as much as he was manipulative and took in Kovac as a son, like, he's also a part of this program. He's a part of this protectorate thing. I mean, who knows when he was taken in? This may just be the only kind of love he's ever known.
Oh yeah.
And so Jaeger has this character that he considers a son who betrayed him, and now he spins him up again to get a second chance with his son, and his son betrays him again, or at least it seems like he may. And there's just a genuine devastation there that makes me think that this might rock sort of the Colonel's perception of himself in a way that could turn the Colonel and could at least have him take some sort of sacrificial action to, I don't know that we can really redeem him, but some sort of action to try to help our heroes. I think that's interesting and really tracks. It doesn't feel like a flip to me. It feels very out of his character,
I think I agree with you. And certainly that might be how this chess match ends, is with him walking away from that game and trying to do something else. Certainly, though, I also think it gives a nice contrast because, for the governor, she's dealing with very real father issues of trying to live into her father's shadow. The Colonel, Jaeger, is also dealing with father issues where he's basically been a father to this surrogate son and is watching his surrogate son possibly betray him all over again. Like he got a second chance to be a good father and screwed it up again, maybe.
Yeah, it reminds me of what Kovac...
I think it's possible that you're right, that he's stepping away from that back and forth. But it also, I think, is just another beautiful parallel because both him and the governor are doing these terrible things, but are also motivated a lot by these issues of fatherhood in two different directions.
We mentioned the possibility of this might be the governor in a previous episode. And that, to me, if instead we find out at the end that this was two fathers who, when they find out the truth of their child betraying them, took two very different actions. Like, what if we find out that Harlan is inhabiting his daughter, and when he found out his daughter was betraying him, he took her over and decided to but maybe Jaeger sees Kovac betray him for the second time and actually is swayed by it. I don't know. I'm thinking way far ahead, and I'm making an assumption about Harlan.
I think I'm going to go off on a related crazy train, and maybe this is what you intended all the time. But I'm thinking about that, and I'm wondering, like, well, when did that happen? Because if Harlan knew his daughter was betraying him, was that the betrayal happening off screen before the show started? And so maybe it's been Harlan the whole time. But I think what I would love is, what if it was the daughter to start, and then after Poe broke that sanctuary where Harlan was supposedly was, That's when Harlan was like, screw this, I'm coming back, took over his daughter's sleeve. And that's why like now knows more about what's going on in the war.
Yeah, that could be.
I don't know. We have no knowledge about that. I'm just kind of spitballing ideas along with you. But it could be fun.
We haven't seen enough of her. I do think there's obviously some sort of mystery happening here, and just like in the first season, I think they're going to tie the mystery probably all the way back to the first death of that meth at the beginning. When we see them, I think that we're going to be revealed at the end. The envoys are basically just really badass noir detectives, you know, and we're gonna get some sort of noir story where we go, oh yeah, this little element you found at the beginning that you kind of didn't pay attention to. That's why all this ties together, and clearly it seems that the elders are going to be involved, and man, I really hope we get a chance to communicate with that elder, and it's not just a force of destruction as it's been so far. I really like that.
Yeah, I'm torn because part of me likes the idea that the elders were forever off screen, like that they are all dead, and it's just that their memory and their technology, and that we're all kind of like stumbling around in the dark. Mm-hmm. But now that they've gone this far with the idea that the elders might be real, like if we're not going to get that, then yeah, I want to have a conversation with one. I want to have some kind of a connection. Oh, here's also a crazy idea.
love a crazy idea.
What if, to some extent, like, we know that the something terrible happened with the archaeologues and with I realized we didn't see Poe and Dig at all this episode.
I know, and that's when I started to say at the beginning of our cast, I started to say this is my favorite episode of the season. And I was like, well, I can't say that because it didn't have Poe in it. Yeah. So it's my favorite Kovac episode.
Sure, but it's okay. So, but going back to my point, like, if what was I gonna say? Oh, right, like. So we still have no idea what actually happened and what it was that the original group of I want to say the founders. I don't think that's their name, but it was the founders.
The founders,
what they did on Harlan's World that was so terrible. We don't know any of that yet. And the thought is that they killed off the elders. But what if to some extent the elders let themselves be killed off, or were somewhat in the process of self-destructing? As this is like, what if part of what happened? Because I was thinking about like, what do the elders think about what humans have done with this technology? And I'm wondering if there's some extent to which, like, the elders went through something similar and realized how corrupting and terrible and awful this technology was, and either died out in their own horrible wars, or kind of as a society went like, no, we need to end this.
Yeah, I'm going to go one step further. What if you had some sort of uprising similar to the Kellist uprising, trying to shut down the stack technology from the elders? And what if the being that is inhabiting Kel right now is a being who destroyed her own people, and so it's like the Kel from the previous culture is inhabiting the Kel from the current culture? All that could be fun stuff to play with. I just hope now that we're this deep in the rabbit hole, I hope we get to communicate with an elder. I just want to know what their motivations are. I want to know more about their culture. I'm really curious.
Well, and I just realized something that I find very depressing given how many questions we still have.
We only got 2 episodes left.
There's 1 episode left.
No, there's 2. This was 6. We got 7 and 8 left.
And this was 7.
No, this was 6, right?
No, we did 7 last time. This was, I think, or at least I announced it wrong.
Oh, no, this was definitely 6. Or wait, hold on. Yeah, this was 6. Barry.
Oh,
yeah,
you're right. Okay,
we did announce it wrong. Sorry.
To everyone who I announced it as that this was about episode 7, my apologies.
We can say we can redo that thing, the thing at the top. Yeah, sorry about that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Yeah. I also have I need to get going pretty soon because again the yeast will not wait. But do we have any feedback we want to talk about?
I don't think we got any feedback. Let me check the stream. But real quick, let me run down a few things that I wanted to throw out from some of my favorite lines. I just really loved. Oops, sorry. I really loved "She's my mission, mine too. At least I'm consistent." I enjoyed that a lot. I really liked "She doesn't lie to me or expect me to lie to myself," which I think the Protectorate was doing, which is like his guiding star now, that he's trying to figure out what all is going on here. I'm not seeing feedback. I really liked when they first find Kovac Prime, she says, "Is that you?" And he says, "I'm a complicated person." That was great. I really loved we have no weapons, and he says, "We are the weapons." And she says, "What the hell does that mean?" Just reminded me so much of Misty Knight in general. Just like that whole
Yeah.
sort of disaffected, like, and he's just talking in envoy speak, and she's like, "That's just silly logic. What are you doing? That's we are the weapons." Anyway, I think that's about all of my little favorite lines. I don't see any feedback, so I guess that is about all we got for this week. Any last thoughts about this episode?
Just that I'm, like I kind of wish we'd had more of this in beginning of the season, and I'm a little like we have 2 more full episodes, so I'm less worried. But I'm curious how they're gonna wrap all of this up.
Yeah.
But wow, I feel like this show has now 100% returned to it's like the very best of the show.
Yeah.
These last 2 episodes have just been phenomenal.
I totally agree. There was one last quote. He says, "The way you suffered allowed you to see the suffering around you." What do you think about that as a
Wait,
thesis?
say that again?
She says, he says, "The way you suffered," I think Kel is talking to Kovacs, "the way you suffered allowed you to see the suffering around you." And
go ahead.
I think that's complicated because a lot of his suffering was abuse, and it's hard to say like someone comes out of abuse better off for it. But it's also it ties into the idea of these meths who never have any problems and so never have any sufferings, and they get worse and worse. And people who go through suffering can see the suffering of others and maybe have a little empathy. It's an interesting thought.
Yeah.
But it's complicated.
I love it because I feel like it gets to a number of things. One of which is that idea of the meths, and that's just such a comment on privilege and any idea of I'm not suffering, so it's hard for me to understand how someone else is suffering. And that I think it often can be a powerful story of I used to be pretty privileged, but then this terrible thing happened to me, and then now I get it. Now I understand. And I personally went through some of that because I'm straight, white, male, cis, well, sort of on the straight and the cis part, but mostly certainly presenting that way, and white and male and Christian. And I didn't really get much of what it meant to deal with that kind of disadvantage until I lost my leg and became disabled. And all of a sudden I had I could empathize, but I couldn't sympathize or whatever. Maybe it's the reverse, but I didn't really know what that felt like. And I think more recently, this is an idea that's kind of been criticized a lot. And sometimes when someone posts like, wow, I'm suffering now, and now I really get how other people are suffering and I want to help, sometimes there'll be a response of like, oh, why didn't you know this before? Why did you have to go through this suffering to get it? You're a jackass. And I've never really liked that idea because I do think I want people to be able to have feelings of compassion for those who are less, well off than they are in whatever regard it is. But I also think we learn from personal experience. We learn, and I really what I'm most interested in is when you go through something difficult in your own life, are you able to use that to say, okay, how does this give me insight into other people's difficulties, into other people's suffering?
Right.
So yeah, I loved her comment on a number of different levels, and I think she's entirely right. It's great to be able to understand suffering even when you're doing fine, but when you suffer, it does give you a much better insight to the suffering of others.
Yeah, but clearly people like Raylan make the opposite decision, and so there's something more to it than just suffer and be better for it. It's suffer, and then how do you respond to that suffering? So I wonder if they'll get into that more. We did actually have one piece of feedback. Drew Gretsch says, Danica Harlan reminds me of Palpatine. They both fabricated the war. That's true. That's good.
That's a good point.
I know you got to go.
I was going to say the one last thing on the Raylan thing is I think you're right, and I think that's part of what Kel I think is saying is that basically when you suffer you have the choice to learn that, and that you're right, you can go in the kind of I have suffered so I want to know how other people are suffering, or you can go in the Raylan direction of, well, I'm going to suffer so I don't give a damn about the rest of your suffering. I'm just going to watch out for me and mine.
That's the classic hurt people. You know?
All right. I do need to go, so you go ahead and do your sign off. I'm going to peace out. Thank you all your fans, to all the fans, and we'll talk more soon.
Peace out. Matthew Westfox, and thank you for listening to Bingers Assemble. We are a Stranded Panda podcast. Hit us up, strandedpanda.com/bingers, and you can find more from your hosts and more shows from the Stranded Panda Network. And if you want to follow along and do the Netflix parties with us, become a Patreon at either patreon.com/Marvel Cinematic Universe, or I'm sorry, patreon.com/MCUcast, or patreon.com/Superhero Ethics, or patreon.com/DC On Screen. Those are our 3 different shows that have Patreons, and we're doing live watches with our patrons every day, every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Yeah, we'll be back soon. We're getting so close to the end of this, and I am really, really excited, guys. All right, we will talk to you soon. Peace. And this is normally where Matthew S. Fox says something. Protect your stack, everybody. Protect your stack. Peace. Bye, live stream. Hope you